It was a Tuesday evening, the kind that slides by so quietly you don't notice it's gone until you're already brushing your teeth and planning for tomorrow. Our apartment smelled faintly like dish soap and the garlic we'd used for dinner. I just finished rinsing the last plate and stacking it into the drying rack. My wife was on the couch, legs tucked under her, face lit by the pale glow of her phone. That was our routine lately. Dinner, cleanup, a little TV we didn't really watch, then scrolling in silence while the day drained out of us. We've been living in that rhythm for months. It wasn't dramatic or terrible. It was just flat, like the volume of our lives had been turned down to a level you get used to without realizing. I dried my hands and walked over. Nothing theatrical, no big speech in my head. I just wanted to be close to her for a second. I sat beside her and rested my hand lightly on her shoulder, the way I'd done 1,000 times before. It was the smallest gesture in the world, the kind that doesn't even register as a choice. A normal husband thing. She reacted like I'd startled her. Her body shifted away so fast that my hand slid off her shoulder. She didn't scream or jump. It was worse than that. She pulled back with this sharp, controlled movement, and when she turned her head to look at me, her eyes were cold in a way I'd never seen directed at me. Not tired, not annoyed, something harder. "Don't touch me," she said. She didn't raise her voice. Actually, she said it almost casually, like she was reading a text message out loud. She didn't even look up from her screen for more than a second. I have self-respect. I just sat there for a moment, my brain catching up. The sentence didn't fit the situation. It was like hearing a stranger speak your name in a place you don't expect. I replayed what she said, trying to find a meaning that made sense. Self-respect? What was that supposed to mean here? I wasn't doing anything out of line. I wasn't grabbing her, cornering her, demanding something. I put my hand on her shoulder. We were married. We'd been married for 6 years. I stared at her profile, half expecting her to laugh and say she was kidding or admit she'd had a rough day. But she just went back to scrolling, her thumb moving in slow, steady arcs. "What's that supposed to mean?" I asked. My voice came out calmer than I felt. She cut me off without looking up. "It means I don't let people touch me whenever they feel like it. I have standards." Standards. The word landed like a slap, not because of the word itself, but because of how she said it. People. Like I was in some vague category she needed to guard herself from. Like I was some random guy trying to get too comfortable, not her husband sitting on her couch in our home. I leaned back slightly and studied her face. This wasn't her being in a mood. She wasn't distracted or half asleep. She was deliberate. Even the rhythm of her words felt measured, like she'd practiced them in her head. "Since when do I fall into the category of people you need to protect yourself from?" I asked. She finally looked at me properly, and there was something in her expression I couldn't name. Not guilt, not uncertainty, more like confidence sharpened at the edges. "Since always," she said. "You just never noticed." That was the moment I felt something crack. Not loudly, more like the quiet splitting you hear when ice shifts under your feet. Never noticed before, right? Because apparently I'd been crossing lines for 6 years and had only now been informed. My chest tightened with a mix of anger and disbelief. If she'd said she was exhausted or uncomfortable, I would have backed off without thinking twice. But this wasn't that. This was a verdict. I stood up because sitting there suddenly felt too small. I went to the kitchen and grabbed a glass of water, mostly so I could do something with my hands. My mind wouldn't stop spinning. When I came back, she was texting someone. Not casually, furiously. Her thumbs were flying, her shoulders slightly hunched, like she was mid-argument or sending a play-by-play report. "Who are you texting?" I asked. "Just the girls," she said, eyes still glued to the screen. The girls. That could have meant any friend group. But lately, she'd been spending a lot of time with a specific circle. Her single friends who'd had rough breakups and very strong opinions about what men did wrong. I didn't hate them. I wasn't insecure about them. But I'd noticed something shift in the way she talked after those hangouts. Little phrases that didn't sound like her. Little rules. Little tests. I sat back down, but this time I left a full cushion between us. If she wanted space, fine. She could have it. But I wasn't going to pretend I hadn't just been shoved out of my own marriage for touching my wife's shoulder. She kept texting for another 10 minutes. Every so often she gave these small laughs, not the kind she shared with me anymore. The kind you give when someone validates you, when they're on your side and you're feeding them a story you want them to enjoy. Then she stood up without a word and walked to the bedroom. The door closed softly behind her. No slam, no announcement, just a clean exit like she'd finished her scene. I stayed on the couch staring at the blank TV. The apartment suddenly felt bigger and emptier. My head kept looping on that phrase. I have self-respect. The way she said it didn't just mean don't touch me. It implied that being affectionate with your spouse was something a person with dignity wouldn't allow. Which meant what exactly? That I was disrespecting her by wanting closeness? That she'd been disrespecting herself all these years by letting me be a normal husband? None of it added up, and that's what made it feel worse. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a new rule, one I hadn't agreed to. From the bedroom, I could hear her voice through the door. She was on the phone now. Her tone was animated, light, almost excited. The same energy she used when she had good gossip or a story she couldn't wait to tell. That's when it clicked. This wasn't just about a tired Tuesday night. This had a backstory I wasn't part of. The language, the timing, the confidence, none of it felt spontaneous. It felt coached, like she'd been handed a script with the punchline highlighted. And if that was true, then tonight wasn't a random moment. It was a test, a move, a new dynamic she was trying to establish. I'd failed it the second I questioned it. I sat there, listening to her laugh softly behind the door, feeling a strange mix of sadness and anger settle into place like a heavy coat. I didn't know what game we were playing yet, but I knew one thing for sure. Something had shifted, and whatever had started tonight wasn't going to end by pretending it never happened. The next morning, she came downstairs like the night before had been a dream I'd had alone. She padded into the kitchen in her robe, hair still in that messy half bun she wore when she didn't feel like trying. She poured herself coffee like always, humming faintly under her breath. The sun was coming through the blinds in thin stripes across the counter. If I hadn't been sitting there with a knot in my chest, I would have thought we were in one of those normal, forgettable mornings that make up most of married life. "Morning," she said casually. "Morning." I answered. She didn't look at me. She started stirring sugar into her mug, tapping the spoon against the ceramic twice before she set it down. Then, as if we were resuming a conversation that had only been paused, she started listing things she needed from me today. "I need you to pick up my dry, cleaning after work," she said, taking a sip. "The blue dress and my work blazers. They close at 6, so don't forget." She said it the way she always did, like I was a reliable extension of her schedule, like my time was a drawer she could open whenever she needed something. She didn't ask if I was free. She didn't say please. Not because she was rude by nature, because in her mind, it was already decided. That was the contract of our marriage. She needed something, I did it. "Oh, and can you stop by the bank?" she added, glancing at her phone. "There's an overdraft fee on my account that needs to be taken care of. It's like $40, but still annoying." I stood at the stove, buttering toast, listening to her stack tasks on top of me one after another like plates at a buffet. "Also," she continued, "I told Fiona we'd meet her and her new boyfriend for dinner Friday. That place downtown with the good steaks. The expensive one." She finally looked up, eyebrows lifted slightly, waiting for the automatic agreement she'd gotten for years. Normally, I would have nodded. Normally, I would have said sure, no problem, we'll make it work. I had said those words so often they barely felt like choices anymore. But this morning, something in me was awake in a way it hadn't been last week. Maybe it was anger. Maybe it was the sting of how she'd looked at me on the couch. Maybe it was the realization that if I let last night pass without a response, it would become the new normal. I set the knife down slowly and looked at her directly. "Don't ask me," I said calmly. "I have self-respect too." The spoon froze halfway to her mouth. For a second, she just stared, like her brain hadn't processed the sentence. It was almost funny to watch, the way something so familiar sounded foreign when it came out of my mouth instead of hers. "What did you just say?" she asked. "You heard me." I kept my voice even. "I have self-respect. I don't just do things whenever people feel like asking." Her mouth opened slightly, then closed. Her eyes flicked across my face like she was searching for the punchline. That's completely different, she said finally. How? I asked. Because these are normal requests, she snapped. Practical things. We're a household. Stuff needs to get done. And last night wasn't a normal moment between married people. I asked. She set her mug down hard. Coffee sloshed slightly over the rim. That's not the same thing at all, she said, voice rising. What I said was about personal boundaries. My body, bodily autonomy. You're being spiteful. I had to give her credit. She said it with the confidence of someone who'd rehearsed those arguments too. Autonomy, boundaries, spiteful. Like she'd been handed a neat, labeled box of words and was pulling them out one by one. So, when you establish boundaries, I said, it's about autonomy. When I establish boundaries, it's spite. She rolled her eyes like I was missing something obvious. Yes, because these things need to get done. Dry cleaning, banking, groceries. That's responsibility. It's not a boundary. An affection between spouses isn't responsibility? I asked. She waved a hand dismissively, as if that part of the conversation was childish to even touch. That's not what this is about. Then explain what it's about, I said. Use small words so I can understand. The sarcasm landed. I saw it in the tightening of her jaw. It's about not feeling pressured, she said sharply. Not feeling obligated to be physical just because we're married. There it was. Clean, simple, and packaged like a slogan. Maybe it was true. Maybe she had been feeling pressure. But that wasn't what she'd said last night. She hadn't said, I'm not in the mood. She hadn't said, I need space. She'd said, I was beneath her self-respect. Great, I said, nodding slowly. Then you'll understand why I don't feel obligated to be your personal errand boy, just because we're married. Her eyes snapped wider. That's not. You're twisting my words. I'm using your exact logic, I said. You don't want to feel obligated to do something you don't want to do. Neither do I. She stared at me for a long moment, like she couldn't decide whether to be offended or confused. I could almost see the gears turning, trying to locate the flaw in my argument. She didn't find one. Fine, she said, voice clipped. I'll pick up my own dry cleaning. Don't ask me. I repeated softly. I have self-respect. Stop saying that, she hissed. What? I asked. You seem to think it was a perfectly reasonable thing to say last night. Her face flushed, not embarrassed, angry, like I was committing some kind of offense by holding up a mirror. This is insane, she said, pushing back from the counter. You're acting like a completely different person. No, I said. I'm acting like someone who learned a new vocabulary word. Self-respect. Turns out it's useful. She stood there for a second longer, lips tight, then stormed out with her coffee. The bedroom door slammed hard enough that the glass in the sink rattled. A second later, I heard her voice upstairs, muffled but sharp into her phone. Probably the same friends she'd been texting last night. I ate my breakfast in peace, listening to her pace overhead, and tried to sort through what I was feeling. A part of me hated that I was doing this. I didn't want a war in my own kitchen. I didn't want to score points. I didn't want to be sarcastic or stubborn. But another part of me felt strangely steady, because for the first time in a long time, I wasn't playing my role automatically. I wasn't letting the rules change without my consent. If she wanted to redefine what respect looked like in our marriage, fine. But we were going to explore that definition in full, not just where it benefited her. She came back downstairs about an hour later, fully dressed, like she'd strapped on armor. She sat across from me at the table in a way that made it feel less like breakfast and more like a negotiation. Okay, she said. We need to talk about this. Sure, I said. Talk. She took a breath, like she was choosing her words carefully. What you're doing isn't the same as what I did, she began. What I said was about personal boundaries. And what you're doing is just retaliating. So make it make sense, I said. If your boundaries are real because they're yours, why aren't mine real because they're mine? Her eyes narrowed. Because you're refusing to help your wife over hurt feelings. That's childish. If I'm childish, I said quietly, then tell me what it was when you looked at your husband of 6 years and told him not to touch you because you had self-respect. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. For a second, something flickered in her expression. Not surrender, not apology, but uncertainty. like she realized how the words sounded when they weren't wrapped in her own viewpoint. She didn't address it, though. Instead, she stood back up, jaw set. "This isn't over," she said. "You're right," I replied. "It's just getting started." She went upstairs again, voice already rising on the phone as she disappeared. And I sat there knowing the line had been drawn. I didn't know how far she was willing to take this or what her friend were telling her. But I could feel something building under the surface now, like pressure in a pipe. Whatever this was, it wasn't going away. It was about to spread into everything. After that morning, the apartment stopped feeling like home and started feeling like a place where every small interaction was loaded. She didn't apologize. She didn't even mention Tuesday night. She just moved through the days as if nothing had happened, like my reaction would fade if she ignored it long enough. But I didn't let it fade. That afternoon, she tested me the first chance she got. I walked in from work and found her by the door with a pile of clothes and keys in her hand. "Can you take these to the car?" she asked lightly. "I'm running to the dry cleaner." I didn't argue or raise my voice. I just met her eyes. "Don't ask me. I have self-respect." Her face tightened. She didn't say anything. She carried the clothes herself, shutting the door harder than necessary. Wednesday came with a different request. "Can you help me move the heavy boxes in the garage later?" she asked, trying to sound casual, like it was no big deal. "Don't ask me. I have self-respect." She muttered something under her breath and walked away. By Thursday, she tried guilt instead of practicality. Over dinner she sighed and said, "Marriage is about compromise, supporting each other. You're acting like we're roommates, keeping score." I kept eating. "Then why did you act like we were strangers on Tuesday?" I asked. "Why was I just people to you then?" Her jaw tightened. "That was about boundaries. And this is about boundaries too," I said. "Just not the kind that only go one way." She left the table without finishing. Every day, she tried a new approach. Logic, sweetness, frustration wrapped in politeness. None of it changed my answer. I stayed steady, and that steadiness got under her skin more than any shouting match could have. By Friday, I could feel something shift in her. She wasn't just annoyed anymore. She was uneasy, like she couldn't predict me, and that scared her. Friday afternoon, her friend Lillian came over. I was in the living room, but their voices carried from the kitchen. "He's being completely unreasonable," my wife complained. "I swear, every time I ask him to do anything, he says he has self-respect and refuses." "What exactly is he doing?" Lillian asked. "He's throwing my words back at me," my wife snapped. There was a pause. "That's actually kind of brilliant," Lillian said. "Whose side are you on?" My wife shot back. "I'm not picking sides," Lillian replied. "I'm just saying, you set rules about respect and boundaries. You can't get mad when he follows the same rules." "But it's different," my wife insisted, sounding less sure now. "How?" Lillian asked. "Because it just is." Even I could hear that answer wasn't convincing. Saturday morning brought the real reveal. I was in the garage when I heard voices outside. I cracked the door and listened. My wife was in the backyard with Joyce and Madison, her closest single friends lately, holding what sounded like an emergency meeting. "You need to get control of this before it gets worse," Joyce said sharply. "You set boundaries early. He should have respected them." "He flipped it on me," my wife said, the worry in her voice finally obvious. "Then escalate," Madison said. "Get his family involved. Make it clear this behavior is unacceptable." Joyce agreed fast. "Embarrass him in front of people. He'll fall in line." My wife hesitated. "That seems extreme." "Extreme is letting him walk over your boundaries," Joyce snapped back. "Men need structure. They can't think they have equal say in everything. Equal say in our marriage." Then they laid out the plan. Sunday, when my brother Kenneth came for the game and her parents came for dinner, she'd ask me for a simple favor in front of everyone. When I refused and said the self-respect line, they were sure my family would shut me down for her. I closed the garage door quietly, my hands steady even though my mind was racing. So Tuesday night hadn't been spontaneous. It had been coached, a move, a test meant to reset the balance of power. And now, because it backfired, they wanted to turn it into a public trial. Fine. If Sunday was going to be an ambush, then I was walking into it with my eyes open. Sunday came with that uneasy feeling you get before a storm you can already see in the distance. I woke up early, not because I had plans, but because my body didn't know how to relax anymore. The air in the apartment felt staged, like everything was being arranged for a performance. My wife was up before me, cleaning with a kind of focus that didn't feel natural. Counters spotless, pillows aligned, music on, phone in her hand every few minutes. She kept checking the clock. I would have thought she was just excited for guests, if I hadn't heard her and her friends planning the ambush the day before. I stayed quiet, drank my coffee, watched her build the set. Kenneth arrived first. My brother walked in loud and easy, carrying a cooler like he owned the place. "How's married life?" he asked, dropping onto the couch. "Educational," I said, and he laughed, assuming I was joking. For a little while, we did the normal thing. Pre-game chatter, snacks, the comfortable rhythm we'd always had. My wife played the perfect hostess, smiling too brightly, laughing a second too late. I could see her glancing at the clock, waiting for a moment. At exactly 2:30, right before kickoff, she stepped into the living room with that sweet, practiced tone. "Honey, could you run to the store quick? I forgot ingredients for the salad, and my parents will be here in an hour." There it was. Simple request. Public stage. Kenneth in the front row. I didn't flinch. I looked up at her and said evenly, "Don't ask me. I have self-respect." The room went silent in a way that felt physical. Kenneth froze mid-sip, eyes bouncing between us like he was watching something he didn't understand. "I'm sorry," my wife said, voice tightening. "You heard me," I said. "I don't just do things whenever people feel like asking." Kenneth cleared his throat. "I can go if you want. No big deal." "No," my wife snapped. Her smile slipped. "This is between me and my husband." She turned back to me, anger rising fast. "So helping your family is beneath you now." I let that hang for a beat, then said, "Helping family. Interesting. Tell me, when you told me Tuesday night, 'Don't touch me, I have self-respect,' was that about helping family?" Kenneth's head jerked toward her. "Wait, what happened Tuesday?" My wife's face went red. "That's different." "Different how?" I asked calmly. "You decided self-respect means not doing things you don't want to do just because someone asks. I'm using the same rule. I'm not your errand boy anymore." Kenneth looked like he wanted to disappear. "Maybe you too should." "Stay," I said. "This is perfect timing." My wife stared at me like I'd broken the script. Before she could regroup, the front door opened. Her parents stepped in with flowers and a casserole, took one look at our faces, and stopped. "Everything okay?" my father-in-law asked. My wife forced a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Maybe you can talk sense into him. He thinks helping around the house is beneath him." Her mother looked confused. "What's going on?" I answered before my wife could launch into her prepared version. "Here's the situation," I said. "If someone tells their spouse that normal affection is beneath people with self-respect, do they get to demand favors and errands without being held to the same standard?" Her parents blinked. "What do you mean she said that?" her mother asked. "She told me not to touch her because she has self-respect," I said plainly. So I started using that same standard with her requests. Now I'm the villain. The room went dead quiet. "You said what to him?" her mother asked softly, turning to her daughter. "It wasn't like that," my wife said quickly. "He's exaggerating." "Then explain it," her father said, voice flattening. "Because that's what it sounds like." My wife opened her mouth, then closed it. She looked around the room, at her brother-in-law, at her parents, at me, and for the first time all week, she didn't have an answer ready. Her father repeated slowly, like he needed her to hear it clearly. "So you told your husband that touching you was something a self-respecting person wouldn't allow." That phrasing hit hard. I watched the moment land on her face, the way her eyes shifted, the way her confidence cracked. Kenneth finally spoke, careful but honest. If my wife said that to me, I'd probably react like he did. My wife looked betrayed. "Then tell us why he's wrong," Kenneth added. "Make it make sense." She couldn't. The silence stretched until her mother said firmly, "Sophia, you owe your husband an apology, and you owe us an explanation for trying to turn this into a public lesson." My wife went pale. She looked like someone who'd walked onto a stage and forgotten every line. She mumbled, "I need some air," and rushed out the back door. I started to follow, but her mother stopped me with a small shake of her head. "Let her think. So we sat there, the game playing in the background with no one watching. Through the window, I could see my wife pacing outside, phone pressed her ear, talking fast, calling for backup. But inside the living room, her plan was already in ruins. And whatever came next, I knew one thing for sure. There was no going back to how things were before Tuesday. We sat in the living room after she walked out, and the silence felt heavier than any argument we'd had all week. The game was on, the commentators loud, the crowd noise rising and falling, but none of us were really watching. Kenneth stared at the screen like he was trying to read meaning in the pixels. My father-in-law leaned back with his arms crossed, jaw tight. My mother-in-law looked more tired than angry, like she was trying to figure out how her daughter had drifted this far without noticing. Through the back window, I could see my wife pacing the patio, phone pressed her ear, moving in loops like a caged animal. Every few steps she'd stop, gesture with her free hand, then start walking again. Whoever she was talking had her worked up. I could guess who it was. Joyce, Madison, the support crew she'd been leaning on all week. The same people who'd promised her that if she pressed the right buttons, I'd fall in line. After a while, my mother-in-law spoke into the quiet. "We're sorry," she said, looking at me directly. "We raised her better than this." "You raised her fine," I said, and I meant it, but she's been taking advice from the wrong people. My father-in-law grunted. "I never liked that Joyce woman, always turning marriage into a battlefield." Kenneth finally looked over at me, eyebrows pulled together in that half-worried brother way. "You okay?" I breathed out slowly. I don't know. It was the truth. I wasn't falling apart, but I wasn't steady either. There's a kind of exhaustion that comes from repeating the same argument with someone who refuses to hear it. And there's another kind of exhaustion that comes from realizing the argument wasn't just between the two of you. It was being fed by a whole chorus off stage. Another 10 minutes passed. Maybe more. Time was slippery in that moment. Then the back door opened. She stepped inside slowly, like she wasn't sure she was allowed to. Her eyes were red. Not just watery, red in that raw way that means someone has been crying hard, maybe even fighting for breath. Her shoulders had lost their stiffness. She didn't look angry now. She looked smaller. She stood near the doorway for a moment, scanning the room. Her parents were still there. Kenneth was still there. The whole audience she tried to recruit was still sitting where she left them. But now the energy was different. This wasn't her stage anymore. It was a room full of people waiting to see who she was going to be next. She came to the kitchen table and sat down across from all of us. Her hands were clasped so tightly her knuckles were pale. She took a breath, held it, then let it go like she was about to jump into cold water. "I owe you an apology," she said, looking straight at me. A big one. Kenneth muted the TV. Her parents leaned forward slightly, without meaning to. The room tightened around her words. She swallowed. "I've been talking to Joyce and Madison. They convinced me that I needed to establish dominance in our relationship." The word dominance made her mother flinch. "They said if I let you be affectionate whenever you wanted, you'd start taking me for granted." Her voice trembled, but she kept going. "So I decided to test you." "Test me," I repeated, not to mock her, but because I needed to hear it clearly. She nodded, tears sliding down her cheeks. "The self-respect thing was supposed to make you respect my boundaries and try harder to earn my affection. And then when you did try harder, I was supposed to make you work for other things too. Keep you on your toes." Her mother made a sound that wasn't quite a gasp and wasn't quite a laugh. Pure disbelief. "That's not marriage advice," her mother said sharply. "That's manipulation." "I know," my wife whispered. "I know that now." She wiped her face quickly, like that could erase the humiliation of saying it out loud in front of everyone. "When I called Joyce just now to tell her what happened today, she said it was all your fault for not playing along. She told me I should double down, that I should make you choose between me and your family." My father-in-law shook his head slowly, disgust plain on his face. "And what did you tell her?" I asked. My wife lifted her chin, and for the first time since she walked back in, there was something firm in her voice. "I told her she was insane. I told her not to call me anymore." That surprised me more than I expected. Not because I thought she was incapable of it, but because all week I'd watched her cling to that friend group logic like a life raft. Cutting it off wasn't a small move. I also called Madison, she added, and told her the same thing. I'm done with both of them. Her parents exchanged a look, relief mixed with sadness. She turned back to me. I don't want to lose my marriage over a game I shouldn't have played. I love you. I love our life. And I'm sorry I let other people convince me to mess with it. I studied her face, not because I wanted to punish her, but because I needed to know what was real. The tears were real. The way her shoulders sagged was real. The shame in her voice was real. This wasn't a strategy. This was a person realizing she'd stepped off a cliff and almost dragged both of us with her. What about the self-respect thing? I asked. She nodded quickly. I was wrong. Completely wrong. Using that phrase like a weapon was cruel. Touching your spouse isn't disrespectful. It's normal. You weren't doing anything wrong. She took a shaky breath. And the errands, the demands. I don't want a servant. I want a partner. If I need help, I'll ask nicely. And I'll accept that you might say no sometimes, the same way I might say no sometimes. No more rules that only go one way. Kenneth let out something like a low whistle. So no more games? No more games, she said, wiping her cheeks again. None. I want my husband back, not someone who has to walk on eggshells around me. Her mother's posture softened a little. And your friends? They're toxic, my wife said, voice steadier now. They're divorced for reasons they refuse to admit. I'm not taking relationship advice from people who treat marriage like a power struggle. Her father nodded once, satisfied. We talked for a long time after that. Not in a dramatic, movie scene way. More like people finally pulling splinters out of a wound that's been ignored too long. We went over Tuesday night. What she'd been feeling. How those friends had gotten in her head. Why it felt when she said those words. How quickly something small had turned into a week of war. Her parents stayed for dinner. The meal was awkward at first, but slowly the tension unclenched. By the time they left, it didn't feel perfect, but it felt possible. That night, when we got ready for bed, she stood in the doorway for a second like she wasn't sure if she should come closer. Then she did. Can I ask you something? She said. Sure. How did you know to use my exact words against me? I sat on the edge of the bed and thought for a moment. Honestly, I was angry, hurt. And then I realized that if you thought those words were reasonable in one situation, they should be reasonable in all situations. When you kept saying it was different without explaining why, I knew it wasn't really about boundaries. It was about control. She lowered her head. I hate that I put us through this. Hey, I reached for her hand. She didn't pull away. We worked it out. That's what matters. She sat beside me, leaned against my shoulder carefully at first, then fully, like she was coming home to a place she'd been locked out of. I missed this, she said quietly. Missed what? Just being normal with each other. 3 months later, normal got rewritten again, but in a way that didn't feel like a threat. She came home from the doctor, stood in the kitchen doorway, and smiled in a way that made my heart stop for a second. I'm pregnant, she said. I stared at her, speechless, then crossed the room in 2 steps and pulled her into a hug so fast she laughed. I held her there, feeling the weight of what she'd said settle into something bright and unreal. Later that night, lying awake beside her, I thought about how close we'd come to letting pride and bad advice carve a permanent crack between us. How strange it was that a week of chaos had forced us to finally talk honestly. Not to win, not to control, just to understand. The self-respect drama didn't make our marriage stronger because conflict is good. It made it stronger because it exposed the weak spots we'd been ignoring. It made us choose what kind of partnership we wanted before life demanded more from us. And now, with a baby on the way, that choice mattered more than ever. Whatever came next, we were going to face it as equals. No scripts, no games, just us. Thank you for listening to today's stories. If you enjoyed listening, please like and subscribe if you haven't done so already. Also, leave a comment below to share your thoughts on what happened. Take care.